In the remote village of Kabintan, late in 1960, the midwife's screams echoed through the bamboo walls of a modest home. She had delivered hundreds of babies in her lifetime, but nothing had prepared her for what crawled out of the womb alongside baby Alvin. The creature that emerged was no larger than a newborn, yet its eyes burned with ancient malice. Its skin was mottled black and gray, and razor-sharp claws extended from tiny fingers. The moment it drew breath, it turned those hellish eyes toward the midwife and lunged. Blood sprayed across the delivery room as the demon twin's claws raked deep furrows down the woman's face, barely missing her left eye. She stumbled backward, pressing her hands to the wounds, her voice breaking into hysterical sobs as the creature scuttled across the floor like a spider and vanished through a crack in the wall. But the damage was done. Word spread through Kabintan like wildfire. Alvin had been born with a demon twin. From that moment, the boy's life became a waking nightmare of whispered accusations and fearful stares. Children would cross themselves when they saw him coming, and mothers would pull their little ones indoors when his shadow fell across their doorsteps. The adults were no kinder. They spoke openly of driving his family from the village, their voices sharp with superstitious terror. "That boy carries evil in his blood," they would mutter, pointing at young Alvin as he walked alone to school. "The demon will return for him." His father, a patient man worn down by years of defending his son, managed to negotiate their right to stay through careful diplomacy and promises. But the damage to Alvin's childhood was irreversible. Day after day, he would return home in tears, his young heart breaking under the weight of hatred he couldn't understand. When a new witchcraft captain took office, the harassment lessened, but the scars remained. Alvin grew up isolated, finding solace only in his parents' love and in the pages of the single book they owned. A weathered Bible that he read over and over until he could recite entire passages from memory. By the time he reached 20, something had changed in Alvin. His words carried weight beyond his years, and his eyes held depths that unnerved even his parents. He spoke of spiritual matters with an understanding that seemed impossible for someone with no formal religious training, as if knowledge was being whispered to him from sources they couldn't comprehend. Seeking peace from the villagers' persistent hostility, his family moved to the far edge of the village, to a plot of land that others avoided. Local legend claimed it was cursed, home to a family of shape-shifting monster who fed on human flesh under the cover of darkness. But for over a decade, the three of them lived there undisturbed, and Alvin began to taste something he'd never known before: happiness. It was in this isolated sanctuary that he first made contact with the thing that had shared his mother's womb. His father noticed it first, the way Alvin would stand at the edge of their property, facing the massive acacia tree that dominated their backyard, his lips moving in conversation with someone who wasn't there. For 3 days, the older man watched his son speak to empty air, his worry growing with each whispered exchange. Finally, one evening after dinner, his father could bear it no longer. "Son," he said, his voice heavy with concern, "I've been watching you. Who are you talking to by that tree?" Alvin turned to face his father, his expression eerily calm. In the flickering candlelight, his eyes seemed to glow with an inner fire that made his father's blood run cold. "My twin brother," Alvin replied, his voice steady and matter-of-fact. "He lives in that tree now. He's been watching over us since we moved here, and he wants to be part of our family." The father's hands began to tremble as the full implications of his son's words sank in. "Alvin," he whispered, "your brother, your twin, he's a demon. You can't trust him." But Alvin's smile never wavered. He's been nothing but kind to me, Father. Just because he's different doesn't make him evil. He protects us. He loves us. The conversation that followed stretched deep into the night, filled with warnings about the deceptive nature of dark spirits and pleas for caution. But Alvin remained unmoved, his faith in his demon twin absolute. As midnight approached and his father finally gave up the argument in exhaustion, neither of them noticed the pale figure perched in the acacia's highest branches, its golden hair catching moonlight as it watched them with eyes like burning coal. November brought with it a creeping dread that settled over Kabintan like morning fog. Children began disappearing from their beds in the dead of night, leaving behind only the lingering scent of sulfur and scratches on windowsills that looked disturbingly like claw marks. The first to vanish were two young brothers, aged 7 and 9, plucked from their shared bed while their parents slept mere feet away. Then came the infant, only 7 months old, taken from her cradle without so much as a cry to wake her mother. When the frantic families formed search parties, they found no footprints, no broken branches, no trail of any kind. It was as if the children had simply dissolved into the night air. But the villagers knew exactly who to blame. A delegation arrived at Alvin's door just as the sun reached its zenith, their faces hard with accusation and grief. The spokesman, a weathered man whose own grandson was among the missing, stepped forward with barely contained rage. "We know it's you," he snarled, pointing a gnarled finger at Alvin. "Witnesses saw your face in the darkness. They watched you steal our children." Alvin's protestations fell on deaf ears. He hadn't left their property in weeks, he insisted. He had no connection to these disappearances. But the crowd's fury only grew, fed by desperation and the need for someone to blame. The truth was more terrifying than anyone imagined. Each night, while Alvin slept peacefully in his bed, his demon twin stalked through the village like a shadow given form. It wore Alvin's face like a mask, perfectly mimicking his appearance as it hunted for fresh prey. The creature had grown stronger over the years, fed by the hatred and fear that surrounded its human brother. What had once been a small, scrabbling thing had evolved into something far more dangerous, a predator that could walk among humans undetected, using Alvin's innocent face to gain entry to homes where children slept. The confrontation at their door stretched for hours, with Alvin's father desperately trying to mediate between his son and the increasingly hostile crowd. But when the villagers left empty-handed, their threats hanging in the air like smoke, the family knew their time was running out. That night, as Alvin sat alone in their garden contemplating their impossible situation, a familiar whistle came from the acacia tree. His demon twin materialized from the shadows, its pale hair gleaming in the starlight, its fangs smile wider than usual. "How did your conversation go with Father?" the creature asked, its voice a perfect mimicry of Alvin's own. "He didn't seem pleased about our meetings." Alvin looked up at his otherworldly brother, noting the way its red eyes seemed to pulse with satisfied hunger. "You've been hunting," he said quietly. "The missing children. That was you." The demon's grin never faltered. "It's been months since I've tasted human flesh," it admitted with a chuckle that sounded like breaking glass. "I was growing so very hungry." Horror washed over Alvin as he realized the truth. His twin had been using his face, his identity, to commit unspeakable acts. Every disappearance, every grieving family, every accusation, all of it stemmed from the creature he'd been protecting and defending. "We had an agreement," Alvin said, his voice shaking with betrayal. "You promised you wouldn't." "I promised many things," the demon interrupted, dropping from the tree to land silently beside him. But promises are just words, brother, and I am so very tired of hiding. The next morning brought chaos. More families arrived, this time accompanied by a local folk healer who carried blessed salt and holy water. They had come not to negotiate, but to act. They surrounded the acacia tree with ritual circles and began their exorcism, determined to drive out the evil they believed lived within its ancient trunk. When their spiritual weapons proved insufficient, they turned to more direct methods, axes and machetes that bit deep into the tree's flesh, sending dark sap flowing like blood onto the earth below. The tree groaned and swayed under their assault. Something emerged from within its dying heart. A massive black hand, impossibly large and dripping with otherworldly ichor, burst from the trunk and reached toward the man wielding the largest axe. The villagers scattered in terror, all except for the father who had started the attack. He stood transfixed, watching in horror as the demonic appendage pressed against his chest. There was no pain at first, just a strange coolness spreading through his body. Then he looked down and saw the hole. The creature had somehow reached through flesh and bone to tear out his heart, leaving a perfectly circular wound where his life had been. Blood poured from the cavity as he collapsed, dead before he hit the ground. The remaining villagers fled, their courage shattered by what they'd witnessed. But their retreat was temporary. They would return with fire and fury, and Alvin knew his family's time in Kabintan was over. The acrid smell of burning wood and flesh filled the night air as the villagers torched Alvin's home, their torches casting dancing shadows against the smoke-filled sky. His father had tried to stop them, had thrown himself between the mob and their door, pleading for mercy that would never come. They beat him to death in the dirt outside their burning house, fists and clubs falling like rain until his broken body lay still. Alvin arrived too late to save him. As he knelt beside his father's body, feeling the heat from their still smoldering home against his face, something inside him finally snapped. He called out to his demon twin through tears and rage, his voice carrying across the darkness. When sleep finally claimed him that night at his cousin's house, his dreams were filled with whispered conversations and plans that would make the earth run red with retribution. His twin appeared in those dreams, no longer the mischievous creature from the tree, but something far more terrible, a being of pure vengeance, whose hunger for human suffering had grown beyond all bound. It had moved to an ancient tree near Stairway Lake, it explained, far from the scene of their shared trauma. "I'm sorry about Father," the demon said, its voice carrying genuine remorse for perhaps the first time. "I never meant for him to die." That was another creature's doing, something that shared my tree and didn't appreciate the intrusion. But Alvin was beyond caring about explanations or apologies. His heart had been carved hollow by loss, and only blood could fill the void left behind. "I want them to pay," he whispered into the dreamscape, "all of them." The journey to Stairway Lake took days of treacherous mountain travel, but Alvin pressed on, driven by a need for justice that burned brighter than his exhaustion. When he finally reached the pristine waters at sunset, he found his twin waiting in the ancient tree's embrace, its red eyes glowing like embers in the gathering dusk. "You know what I want," Alvin said without preamble. The demon nodded slowly, its ethereal form rippling in the twilight. "Revenge comes with a price, brother. If we do this, we become something else, something darker." "They made their choice when they killed him," Alvin replied, his voice hard as stone. "Now I'm making mine." The plan they crafted was elegant in its brutality. The demon would return to Kabintan, wearing Alvin's face, hunting down every person responsible for his father's death. But this time, there would be no random feeding, no innocent victims, Only calculated vengeance served with surgical precision. When they returned to the burned ruins of Alvin's childhood home, the demon began its work immediately. It moved through the darkness like liquid shadow, slipping through locked doors and barred windows to reach those who had destroyed his family. The first to die was the man who had struck the killing blow, the one whose fists had crushed his father's skull. The demon took its time with him, savoring each scream as claws opened his chest like a flower, revealing the beating heart within. That organ it claimed as a trophy, leaving the rest to be discovered by his horrified family. One by one, the demon worked its way through its list of targets, those who had burned their house, who had cheered as his father begged for mercy, who had turned their backs on a family's desperate pleas. All of them felt the kiss of supernatural claws in their final moments. The creature was methodical in its approach, ensuring each death carried maximum terror while avoiding collateral damage to the innocent. It had learned patience in its years of hiding, and now that patience served a darker purpose. But the killing spree couldn't last forever. As dawn approached and the demon's work neared completion, it returned to Alvin with news that their time in Kabintan was over. The remaining villagers would soon discover the carnage, and questions would be asked that neither brother could afford to answer. Before the sun could fully rise, Alvin and his grieving mother had fled into the pre-dawn darkness, leaving behind the only home they'd ever known. The demon accompanied them unseen, a guardian angel forged in hellfire and baptized in human blood. Behind them, Kabintan woke to discover 7 mutilated corpses and a truth too terrible to accept, that sometimes justice comes with claws instead of scales, and the innocent and guilty alike must live with the consequences of their choices. Years later, in whatever quiet place Alvin eventually made his home, villagers would still whisper stories about the night their community was visited by something wearing a familiar face. They spoke in hushed tones about the demon twin who protected his human brother with supernatural fury, and how that protection came at a price measured in human hearts. The question that lingered in every telling was whether the creature still watched over Alvin from whatever tree it called home, waiting patiently for the next time someone threatened the only family it had ever known.